There is a new leader of the world's 1.4 billion Roman Catholics, and he is a stunning choice. For the first time in history, the Pope is American. The crowd roared for more than 2 minutes before the new Pope began to speak. He is 69-year-old Robert Francis Prevost from Chicago.
In a time where every gesture between world leaders can spark viral headlines, one peculiar moment between Queen Camilla and Pope Leo. The 14th has captured the attention of millions. It was supposed to be a symbolic meeting, two dignitaries from vastly different traditions coming together in the spirit of unity. But what happened in the Vatican courtyard was anything but expected. As Queen Camilla extended her hand in a formal greeting, something happened that no one could have predicted. The Pope didn't take it. Was this an international snub? Stay with us as we dive deep into this moment.
God never gives up on us. He is always ready to accept us and give meaning and hope to our lives.
Who is Pope Leo XIV? For centuries, when royalty meets the papacy, every gesture is calculated. Every moment steeped in symbolism. These encounters are not mere photo ops. They are global signals. Diplomats watch for tone, theologians study the seating. And when the Queen of the United Kingdom steps into Vatican City, the world doesn't just see protocol, it sees history unfold in real time. But this particular meeting would defy every script. Because while the world expected tradition, what they got was transformation. To truly understand the weight of what happened on that Vatican balcony, you need to understand who Pope Leo XIV is and why his every gesture carries symbolic power. And just when tradition seemed certain, he broke it wide open. Born Robert Francis Prevost, September 14th, 1955. Pope Leo XIV was never the heir apparent of Vatican leadership. A former Franciscan friar and grassroots organizer, he spent much of his early priesthood working in refugee camps in remote villages across sub-Saharan Africa and the Middle East. Before he became pope, he was known for rejecting luxury in favor of humility, even going so far as to travel by horse on difficult roads due to his missionary commitments to the isolated communities in the valleys of Lambayeque. Living in a modest flat, and serving meals with his own hands to the homeless. He was elected to the papacy after the unexpected death of his predecessor, surprising many in the College of Cardinals who had anticipated a more traditional figure. But Leo XIV has made it clear from day one. Tradition matters, but humanity matters more. Media reported that Leo would take up permanent residence in the papal apartments in the Apostolic Palace, rather than in the Domus Sanctae Marthae where Francis lived. His papacy has been defined by one word: presence. Being present where it matters, with those who are forgotten, suffering, or dismissed. He is the first American to fill the role of pope, although he is considered as much a cardinal from Latin America because of the many years he spent as a missionary in Peru. So when Pope Leo XIV stepped away from royal protocol and refused Queen Camilla's handshake, it wasn't defiance, it was depth. It was him, being himself. But even for a pope known for unexpected humility, what happened next was something no one saw coming. The sacred invitation. Why the Queen visited the Vatican. It all began with an invitation hand-delivered via the British ambassador to the Holy See and sealed with the papal crest. The Vatican had extended a personal request for Queen Camilla to visit Pope Leo XIV, marking a significant milestone in British Catholic relations. The visit was tied to the Bridges of Hope initiative, a sweeping interfaith and humanitarian campaign spearheaded by the Pope himself. The goal? To unite global leaders in a pledge toward compassion-driven governance and global healing. Queen Camilla, representing King Charles III during his recovery from surgery, graciously accepted the invitation. But this wasn't just diplomacy. Insiders from Clarence House hinted that the Queen was particularly moved by the Pope's mission, a rare fusion of spirituality, social justice, and modern leadership. For many, Queen Camilla's appearance at the Vatican wasn't just a matter of royal duty. It marked the culmination of one of the most profound image transformations in modern royal history. For Queen Camilla, whose public role has evolved from a controversial figure to quiet cornerstone of the crown, the papal visit wasn't just diplomatic, it was deeply personal. She's no stranger to public judgment. In years past, the mention of her name evoked tabloid frenzy and whispered scandal. She was cast for a time as the antagonist in a royal tragedy that transfixed the world, the saga of Diana, Princess of Wales.
HIV does not make people dangerous to know, so you can shake their hands and give them a hug. Heaven knows they need it.
Diana was beauty, vulnerability, and global adoration personified. Her untimely death only deepened the myth. In the shadow of that legacy, Camilla was, for years, a symbol of intrusion. The other woman, the reminder of a wound. But time did its quiet work. Camilla didn't demand affection. She earned respect. She leaned into unglamorous causes: osteoporosis awareness, palliative care, women's literacy, mental health. Following the passing of Queen Elizabeth II and her own coronation alongside King Charles III, Camilla stepped into the spotlight, not with grandeur, but with groundedness. She chose service over spectacle. Slowly, she rewrote her place in the royal narrative not by replacing Diana, but by redefining what it meant to walk beside the king. Royal insiders describe her as deeply spiritual, fiercely private, and emotionally intelligent. A senior aide once said, "She doesn't seek applause, she seeks impact." And by the time of the coronation, the public mood had shifted. She was no longer a scandal to be forgiven, but a steady figure in her own right. And so, as she stepped into the grandeur of the Vatican, it wasn't just her tiara or title that stood tall. It was her journey, one marked by complexity, endurance, and reinvention. So when Queen Camilla accepted the Vatican's invitation, this wasn't a photo opportunity. It was a pilgrimage. And as the world would soon witness, her moment with Pope Leo XIV would speak louder than any coronation ceremony or royal decree. And so, on a clear spring morning, the Queen's motorcade entered the Vatican gates. She was dressed in formal mourning black, a tradition observed by female royals visiting the Pope, with a lace mantilla covering her silver blonde hair. It was a picture of regal tradition meeting sacred ritual. And waiting at the Vatican was Pope Leo XIV, known for his intellect, humility, and bold public gestures. But the world would soon discover just how bold. Inside the hushed stillness of the Apostolic Palace, where the scent of old incense lingered in the drapery and every fresco whispered centuries of history, Queen Camilla was received not as a monarch, but as a guest of the soul. She had arrived in the ornate halls not with royal bravado, but with the softened air of someone long acquainted with scrutiny and survival. And awaiting her in his signature simple cassock stood Pope Leo XIV, the man the world had come to know as the People's Pontiff, smiling not with pomp, but with something closer to quiet understanding. Their initial exchange followed diplomatic protocol, a customary bow of the head, the official greetings translated across accents and generations. But as aides politely stepped back and cameras remained firmly outside the grand chamber, something shifted. Gone were the stiff expectations of state. What followed was not the meeting of two institutions, but the conversation of two people shaped by the weight of public perception and the inner work of private growth. Queen Camilla was given a private tour of the Vatican's historical archives. There, she was shown rare correspondence between British monarchs and former popes, some dating back centuries, most notable among them. A handwritten letter from Queen Elizabeth II to Pope John Paul II during the Falklands War, an appeal for peace that still resonates today. Witnesses said the Pope and Queen shared profound warmth and mutual curiosity. They spoke of faith, resilience, and leadership in uncertain times. They discussed women's evolving roles in both secular and religious institutions. At one point, Pope Leo reportedly remarked, "A queen who serves with humility is closer to God than a crown that rules without compassion." Camilla, whose crown still sat lightly upon decades of scandal and resilience, spoke in gentle tones about her growing involvement in causes that often go untelevised: palliative care, rural education, literacy for older women.
I'm 75 now, and I can't remember anybody except the Queen being there.
She spoke not as a royal figurehead, but as a woman who had known exclusion, misinterpretation, and finally, restoration. Pope Leo, in turn, listened more than he spoke, his eyes steady beneath his silver brows. He'd been this way long, before the papacy. A listener, a shepherd. From his early days to his current push for interfaith unity, he had always shown a preference for the vulnerable over the powerful. And in Camilla, perhaps, he saw someone who had walked both paths. In a quiet moment inside the Sistine Chapel, the two stood beneath Michelangelo's Last Judgment and observed a moment of silence for victims of war, displacement, and persecution. A photo of the two, heads bowed beneath divine artwork, would later become iconic. For a moment, the heavy walls of the Vatican seemed to breathe with shared memory. There was no throne here, no mitre, only two lives steeped in legacy and reshaped by loss. Then came the soft rustle of protocol returning. A royal aide stepped forward, gently reminding the Queen that the formal appearance on the Vatican balcony was moments away. The private portion of the visit ended with smiles, symbolic gifts, a rosary blessed by the Pope for the Queen, and a rare 17th century illustrated Book of Hours from the Queen to the Vatican Library. Everything had gone perfectly, until it didn't. As they emerged onto the Vatican balcony for the formal goodbye, the moment everyone had been waiting for arrived. But neither of them could have known that the moment to come, the one already loaded with expectation, would unfold not with the choreography of tradition, but with the force of something far rarer: grace. The refusal and the gesture that redefined royal protocol. The great wooden doors of the Apostolic Palace creaked open and the blinding Roman sun spilled onto the marble balcony. Below, St. Peter's Square rippled with anticipation. Thousands had gathered: tourists, journalists, pilgrims, skeptics, craning their necks to witness a historic meeting of spiritual and royal power. Cameras were locked in. Commentators stood ready. Everyone expected the handshake, the photo op that would headline news across continents. Queen Camilla stepped forward with composed grace, her pale dress fluttering gently in the breeze, her eyes adjusting to the light. Beside her, Pope Leo XIV emerged with the quiet solemnity of a man who understood the weight of public ritual and the power of breaking it. For a brief second, their hands hovered near each other. A royal aide standing just behind gave the smallest nod. It was time. Camilla extended her hand. Polite, steady, regal. It was the moment everyone had waited for, the symbolic gesture of mutual respect between the Catholic Church and the British Crown. The world leaned in. But the Pope did not take it. A stunned silence swept across St. Peter's Square the moment the Pope paused, his hands still, his gaze steady, and did not take Queen Camilla's hand. It was as if time itself hiccuped. Gasps broke like waves through the crowd, a sharp intake of disbelief echoed by murmurs of confusion. For a breathless few seconds, no one knew what they were witnessing. A breach of protocol? A personal rebuke? Cameras zoomed in. Broadcasters fumbled mid-sentence. Some clutched their rosaries, others held their breath. And that's when the unexpected happened. Pope Leo gently stepped closer, eyes locked with hers. Then, without a word, He reached not for her hand, but for her shoulders, and in a gesture as ancient as it was unexpected, he bowed his head and kissed her on both cheeks. Gasps fluttered through the crowd. It was not a romantic kiss, nor a political one. It was fraternal, reverent and human. A pope, known for humbling himself before the marginalized, now did the unthinkable. He offered the Queen not just respect, but honor not in the language of protocol, but in the dialect of forgiveness and transformation. A collective exhale gave way to a ripple of applause, hesitant at first, then swelling with emotion. What had begun as shock melted into awe. They hadn't seen a scandal. They'd seen a moment of grace. The cameras flashed, uncertain of what they were witnessing. Commentators stammered. Some called it a breach of Vatican tradition. Others said it was genius. But to those who understood the deeper symbolism, it was a moment of extraordinary grace. Camilla's expression flickered from surprise to something warmer, fuller. Not triumph, not validation, but relief. As if the long burden of public penance had, in one quiet gesture, been acknowledged and released. The Pope then stepped back, clasped his hands before him, and nodded deeply, not as a pontiff to a queen, but as one soul to another. At that moment, no handshake was needed. The absence of it, the refusal, said far more than the gesture ever could. Tears welled in Queen Camilla's eyes. She wasn't the only one moved. Social media erupted. Viewers around the world praised the moment as deeply spiritual, a masterclass in humility, and a historic reset in how power and reverence should be shown. But to fully appreciate the magnitude of Pope Leo XIV's gesture, it's worth revisiting the long and often cautious relationship between the British monarchy and the Holy See. Over the centuries, meetings between British royals and popes have been rare and rigidly ceremonial. From the reign of Henry VIII, who famously broke from the Catholic Church to establish the Church of England, to centuries of religious tensions that followed, these encounters have always carried heavy historical weight. When Queen Elizabeth II met Pope John XXIII in 1961, it was considered groundbreaking, marking the first meeting between a reigning British monarch and a pope since the Reformation. But even then, it was brief, tightly choreographed and symbolically cautious. Her second visit in 1980 with Pope John Paul II was more formal, still. The Queen wore black, spoke carefully chosen words, and observed protocol down to the millisecond. There was little physical contact, and even the gift exchange was somber and distant. A royal historian called it respectful but rigid, like a diplomatic chess move. More recently, Prince Charles met Pope Benedict XVI and Pope Francis in visits described as cordial but clinical. Photos from those encounters show dignified handshakes, polite smiles, but little emotional resonance, and that's precisely why this meeting between Queen Camilla and Pope Leo XIV felt so seismic. This wasn't diplomacy. This was humanity. No palace scripts, no Vatican rehearsals. Just a queen offering a hand and a pope offering a reverence that echoed centuries of reconciliation and transformation. There are some moments in history that don't roar. They don't arrive with fanfare or flashbulbs. They don't trend for shock, but they resonate because they're real. When Queen Camilla stepped into the heart of Vatican City, few expected the encounter to make global headlines. Fewer still expected it to become a turning point in the long, often cautious relationship between the British monarchy and the Catholic Church. And yet, in one unplanned gesture, everything shifted. She reached out her hand not simply as the Queen of the United Kingdom, but as a woman who had walked through fire, endured whispers, and emerged with quiet dignity. A woman no longer shadowed by her past, but shaped by it. Pope Leo XIV a pontiff who has made it his mission to embrace the forgotten, the weary, the undeserving paused. Not because he hesitated, but because he recognized something sacred. He declined the handshake and instead lowered himself in a gesture older than any throne. He kissed her hand, not out of deference to power, but out of reverence for the person behind it. That moment, captured in one photograph, shared in billions of digital heartbeats, spoke louder than any formal address. It was an act rooted not in politics, but in humanity. This wasn't just another royal visit, it was a reckoning, a soft one, the kind that sneaks into history books not with exclamation marks, but ellipses. Because consider what it meant. For a queen once seen as an outsider, to now be embraced as a symbol of reconciliation. For a pope who shuns titles and ceremony, to instead write his message in action. For two institutions built on centuries of tradition to momentarily transcend them. In the hush of that marble hall, beneath the vaulted ceilings of St. Peter's, we didn't just witness diplomacy. We witnessed grace. And grace, when it appears, never announces itself. It simply arrives uninvited, unrepeatable, unforgettable. This encounter has already begun to ripple. Inside the Vatican, sources say talks have quietly opened around joint humanitarian initiatives with the Royal Foundation. In London, senior aides are reportedly exploring new ways to build interfaith partnerships as a gesture of thanks and of next steps. But beyond policies and programs, the deeper legacy is emotional, philosophical, and spiritual. Because this was a reminder to all of us of something we forget in a world spinning fast and furious. That dignity can come in the form of a lowered head. That leadership can be tender. And that healing, whether between nations, faiths, or people, often begins not with words, but with the willingness to see each other as humans. But what happens next? As the world absorbed the unexpected refusal of the handshake and the embrace that followed, headlines exploded. Social media erupted with admiration. Commentators on both sides of the Atlantic hailed the moment as a new blueprint for diplomacy. But within the echo of applause and the storm of analysis, something quieter began to take shape, something potentially historic. Behind the scenes, aides in Buckingham Palace and senior clergy in the Vatican quietly began comparing calendars. What started as whispered admiration is now blossoming into a series of back-channel conversations about more than symbolism. About shared purpose. According to well-placed sources, the Pope's gesture, so intimate and yet so public, may have opened the door to a rare and powerful partnership. Insiders report that both institutions, long rooted in tradition and once wary of overt collaboration, are now entertaining the idea of a joint humanitarian initiative. Not a one-off event, but a sustained coalition uniting the Church's reach with the Crown's influence. One idea. Gaining traction? A multinational refugee resettlement mission anchored by the Vatican's deep work on the ground and supported logistically and diplomatically by the Royal Foundation. It would mark a profound act of moral leadership, particularly at a time when global displacement is reaching historic highs and public trust in institutions is fractured. Another proposal involves an interfaith climate and mental health summit, jointly hosted by the Vatican and the Royal Foundation. It would bring together religious leaders, scientists, and community organizers aiming to address the spiritual and psychological toll of climate anxiety and displacement, especially among youth. Not just a dialogue between faiths, but between generations. And then there's the more whispered possibility, a formal papal address before the British Parliament, reciprocated by a royal speech at the Vatican's Pontifical Academy. If it happens, it would be the first time in history that a reigning British monarch and a sitting pope exchange speeches on moral leadership in an increasingly divided world. For now, none of these plans are confirmed. There are no official press releases, but the gesture that broke with tradition may have just laid the groundwork for a new one, a tradition of cooperation between two of the world's most enduring institutions. And if what insiders say proves true, what happened in Rome won't just be remembered for what didn't happen, the handshake, but for what happened instead. A spark, a soft revolution, a beginning of perhaps more collaborations between Buckingham Palace and the Vatican, and perhaps more visits, more handshakes, or more moments like this. But even if this stands alone, a single gesture frozen in time, it will remain a beacon. Not because of who these two figures were, but because of what they chose to be in a single, unscripted second. In a world filled with noise, posturing, and performative power, this quiet gesture between Queen Camilla and Pope Leo the 14th broke through like a whisper in a cathedral. It was a moment of transcendent honor, one that transformed confusion into clarity, formality into faith, and protocol into poetry. And what started as a moment of confusion became a historic act of humility and unity. So what do you think? Did the Pope's refusal redefine the art of diplomacy? Was this a spontaneous act or a carefully planned message to the world? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also, click the following video shown on your screen. You will enjoy